Okay. Alyn, do you want to kick things off?
I can, but I'll welcome everybody and then hand over. Good evening, everyone. I'm Alyn Smith. I'm SNP MP for Stirling and the SNP's Foreign Affairs lead at Westminster. So I'm really glad to be participating in this event tonight, and I really do thank the YSI, Young Scots for Independence, for the invitation, and the Whitehouse Consultancy for setting things up. We've been doing within the House of Commons a number of things with the Hong Kong community and the Hong Kong group. We're part of the UK presently, but we have a mission to be independent as Scotland. And we believe in the democratic sovereignty of the people of Scotland, and the people best placed to make decisions for Scotland are the people in Scotland. And the people best placed to make decisions about Hong Kong are the people in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong's a wonderful place, which I'm really very fond of myself. I spent quite a while there while I was in practice a number of years ago. And it's a fascinating place. It's a precious place. It's a unique place. And it's a unique place because of its history, which is the accidents of empire that history throws up all around the world. But we have an obligation as the UK, as Scotland, to the people of Hong Kong, because the issues that are being dealt with now are partly of our creation. And we've got an obligation to be that outward-looking internationalist party that we are. So delighted to support the YSI. It's the YSI's event this evening. So if you want me to come back in later on, very happy to, but otherwise I'm very much here in listening mode, because I think we've got some real expertise and some real testimony that we're going to hear this evening from Hong Kong. And it's great that the YSI and our young activists, were blessed in the SNP that we've got such passionate young activists with such an internationalist agenda. And indeed, to prove that in her very existence, we've got Valentina, who I believe is chairing this evening, who I'd pass over to. Valentina, please tell us how it's all going to work.
Well, we've got a few panelists tonight, and we'll be all having a few minute speeches, and then I think we can all pass to a Q&A or a debate later on and talk about the topic. Okay, well, my name is Valentina Servera, and I'm the YSI International Officer. Thank you so much all for attending, and thank you so much, Alyn, for taking part in this, and to Owen Thompson as well. I think we can all agree that what's happening in Hong Kong is an atrocity of violation of human rights and freedom of speech. The victims murdered and injured by the police, the fear they are trying to impose on the Hong Kong people is never going to work, because as long as we can hold on to hope, they'll never be able to control us by fear. I solidarity with Hongkongers, and I think in Scotland, it's our duty to do as much as we can to protect their citizens and mediate peace, not only because of our long-standing relationship with Hong Kong, but also because it's our duty for democracy. All over the world, we are seeing more and more countries trying to be dominated by fear. And we've seen it in Belarus, we've seen it in Georgia, we've seen it in Hungary, we've seen it in Catalonia, in Hong Kong. It's a pandemic also, apart from the virus that we're living. But we have also seen the pacific response of the people. We've seen the people taking the streets, standing up to these wannabe dictators, and we're winning because we have hope and we have each other. We have so much to fight for. We've seen it in the most recent elections in Belarus, USA, or Bolivia, that we have seen people responding and acting and using what should be the most powerful weapon, which is a vote. And we have won against the people that violate human rights in so many different countries in this world, and we have won using democracy. But we still have so much to fight for. The tide is turning, and as long as we stand with each other, as long as we support each other, even if it's from different parts of the world, there will always be hope, and there will always be a side for us and for victory. And thank you so much. So I should pass on now to the next panelist.
Francis, do you want to go ahead and speak now?
Hi everyone, my name is Francis and I am one of the representatives from Fight for Freedom Stand with Hong Kong. So thank you very much to the members of the SNPs and particularly Alyn Smith MP and Stuart Mcdonald MPs. You know, we have worked together for a while now. That you guys have been very supportive to the Hong Kong cause, and I think that's really it's so important that we are generating international support, but most particularly support in the UK because of the deep historic responsibility that the UK has to the people of Hong Kong. So I will just briefly talk about the organisations that are part of Stand with Hong Kong and what it is, and also a brief updates of what's been going on in Hong Kong at the moment. So first, let me introduce what Stand with Hong Kong is. So Stand with Hong Kong is a grassroots lobbying advocacy organisations, and we're based in the UK. We're also based in the US, and we're also based in Brussels in the EU. Our members come from all walks of life. Not many of us are, you know, we have ordinary jobs, and we're not trained in politics. But really, what brings us together, it's because of the where we first started as the anti-extradition law movement started in June 2019, and that was the origin of this whole protest movement that kicked out. And gradually, what really it translates into is China is doing everything that she can to tighten its grip in Hong Kong, and China is doing everything possible to tear up the Sino-British Joint Declaration. So the protests happened last year, started in June 2019, turned into a wider, deeper issues, a mass protest against the Chinese control of Hong Kong. But of course, it's more on China breaking its promises. And the situation has changed massively since June 2020 this year. China has now imposed a national security law in Hong Kong. National security law is unprecedented in the sense that it completely transformed Hong Kong's power dynamic. It imposed a direct rule from Beijing. Crimes, for example, like protesting or even shouting the famous protest slogan, "Liberate Hong Kong," revolution of our taste, you could end up in jail by just shouting or displaying that slogan. That is a severe breach of the Sino-British Joint Declaration, and also China's promised Hong Kong to be a one country, two system framework, that Hong Kong would continue to be autonomous after the handover. So that has changed pretty much everything. And in light of that situation, the UK then has declared that China has breached the Joint Declaration. This is the second time China has breached the declaration, and the third time actually happened relatively recently, and that was when China disqualified 4 legislators in the Legislative Council, which is our mini parliament. So in light of what the recent events is, the UK took an active response, and the active response is offering citizenships, a path to citizenships for up to 5 million people from Hong Kong, with a British national overseas passport status. So the British national overseas passport is a type of British passport that were issued to people from Hong Kong who were born before 1997. And it's a form of citizenship that allow Hong Kongers to remain a connection with the UK. Although this form of citizenship does not guarantee your rights to live and work in the UK. So before this new immigration route was announced, we often make the joke that EU citizens have more rights than us British overseas, because EU citizens they used to be able to work and restricted, but British national overseas, Hong Kongers who have British connection were not given that right. So now the UK governments have changed the law and allowing Hong Kongers to, with that status, or if you don't have status, if your parents or your partner have that status, so BNO and their dependents, to move to the UK. And we are expecting, government papers are expecting, even for first year, there might be up to 100,000 people moving to the UK, because there is a genuine fear in Hong Kong that the national security will completely change the way of life in Hong Kong. Mass persecutions, mass arrests, white terror is happening every day. So on a more sort of recent update on what's been going on today, I mean, the latest updates I have with I could tell everyone is a former legislator with the Democratic Party, Ted Hui. He has announced today that he is now going into exile. He is not sure which country he will settle. It is believed that he's now on his way to the UK. He was in Denmark for 3 days for a conference, although that the Danish MP who organised his trip did say that the meeting was kind of made up for him so he was able to leave Hong Kong, because Ted currently is facing multiple charges, including rioting, and he's on police. He's on, I believe he's on police bail, and hence he needs a good excuse to leave Hong Kong, which is actually really sad. Think about a former legislator had to be rescued by another legislator from a democratic country in order for him to leave Hong Kong, to flee. And that is how bad the situation in Hong Kong has become. And then just 2 days ago, a really famous activist, Joshua Wong, Agnes Chow, and Ivan Lam have all been sentenced for a rather tough sentencing. The charge was inciting an unauthorized assembly outside the police headquarters, which is anything, inciting. And what's for unauthorized assemblies, if you are organising an assembly outside of any public space without permission from the police, then you can be laying yourself onto that charges. So Wong been given a 15-month sentence. Chow has been given a 10-month sentence, and Lam was given 7-month sentence. This is a really horrible piece of law, and they will be sadly spending the Christmas in jail. So I'll finish off my introduction. So Stand with Hong Kong, we are continuing doing what we're doing. Our main objectives is to lobby the UK, US, and the EU governments together to apply real pressure on China in order to safeguard Hong Kong's freedom and Hong Kong's autonomy. Particularly on UK because of its deep historic link, and with the new immigration routes available. Well, now that the focus we have at the moment is we want to make sure people who are moving from Hong Kong, moving to the UK, will be able to settle, make it as easy as possible, and also inform various sectors that how you could welcome Hong Kongers, because a lot of Hong Kongers moving to the UK, they are westernized, but at the end of the day, they are moving to a new country, so it might not necessarily be that easy. And we're all continuing our work to pressure the UK government on Magnitsky-style sanctions. We are convinced that good sanction regime could really target human rights perpetrators from Hong Kong. Last but by no means least, this is not my real name. I cannot show my face to you because I still have family members in Hong Kong. The reality is, if I wish I could speak to you in my real identity as I was before this whole situation unfolded. But unfortunately, the threat is real, and the fact is, not just myself, but other members of our group, that we have to remain anonymous. It tells you how bad it is. And even though we are all based overseas, it's not a guarantee that we are not free from the threats and the intimidation from the Chinese. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Francis. Really appreciate you coming and sharing your story. I think now it would be best to hand over to Stuart Mcdonald Mp. Are you on the line?
Yes, I'm on the line. Apologies, just I'm a technical glitch with the system, but I'm here now.
No worries. Would you want to say a few words, sort of a bit about your perspective as an MP, and I believe as a member of the APPG on Hong Kong and the Foreign Affairs Committee?
Yep, sure. I mean, the first of all, well done to the YSI for putting this event together along with the campaign. It's good to see not just that it's happening, but there's a decent turnout as well. The YSI have got a good track record as our party's youth movement of always standing up for those whose freedoms that we enjoy are under threat. So hats off to you for that. And really, I mean, to follow on from Francis, a person who's had to have their voice altered, can't use their proper name, can't show their face. It should really bring home to those who perhaps don't follow the situation in Hong Kong as much as others do, bring home just how serious the situation is. And to give you an example that is much closer to home for us in Scotland, there are a group of university students at Scottish universities from Hong Kong who I meet up with as frequently as possible, albeit online these days. And when they were protesting, pre-COVID times, when they were protesting against the national security law and the actions of the Beijing government, they were having their photographs taken and sent back to the authorities in China, who would subsequently contact their family members to tell them to get their kids to stop doing what they're doing. What we're dealing with, it touches the streets that we all live in, which is why it's important that we have events like this to better understand it, understand the nuances of it, but also to work out how we can engage and support those who want and need our support. I think that myself and Alyn Smith have met with some of the Hong Kong activists who've done a great job in taking the message around the world, people like Nathan Law and others. Obviously, we're very alarmed with cases such as the 12 Hong Kong youths. The case just mentioned of Joshua Wong causes deep alarm and deep worry. And I think, in fairness, we've seen the UK government do a lot of good things. I think even Alyn would be the first to say that. We have seen them do some good things. But the last thing I would say, because I don't want to hog the microphone, don't be. Just as I joined, I heard Valentina talk about Belarus. And let us not end the year thinking that, this is a bad year for free speech, free living, free societies, democracy, the rule of law. Hasn't been a great one, but what we've seen in Belarus, what we've seen in Hong Kong, what we're seeing here tonight, right now, is that people will always push back. People will always push back. Tyrants will always fall. It will seem, I'm sure, it's easy for me to say this in the comfort of my home. I'm sure it will feel dark for people in Hong Kong. It will feel dark for people in Belarus. But there is always light at the end of the tunnel. And it's our job to help. And it's our job to ask what we can do to help. Not just force ourselves into a situation, but ask what we can do that is meaningful. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that, hearing more ideas about what we can do that's meaningful. A big thanks to the Fight for Freedom campaign. I should mention Chris Whitehouse, who possibly writes to me more than any of my constituents write to me about this. But he's right to do so because it matters. And because it matters, we should be engaged, we should be involved, we should be in the conversation. So I'm looking forward to the rest of the evening.
we've all gone quiet. Is
Sorry, I think we're just having some technical difficulties. I think now, Alyn, are you happy to share questions?
I can do if you want. Yes.
Yeah.
Keep it loose. The floor is anybody's who wants it. The idea is to have a discussion.
Great. I think there should be a feature to raise hands for questions.
All right. Well, for my part, following on from Stewart, obviously he is defence spokesperson, me as foreign affairs. We work very closely together, and we're of a mind on the situation in Hong Kong. I support the UK government where I agree with the UK government line. My criticism of the UK government would be that we could do more, and I think that the offer that the UK government's made in terms of BNO passport holders, I think that's part of an answer. I don't think it's the answer. I think there needs to be far tougher sanctions on China in terms of its economic activity, in terms of its involvement in infrastructure projects, in terms of Magnitsky sanctions. We really should have given them a better name. Nobody can pronounce it, it seems, to actually bring home to key personnel within Hong Kong, within Beijing, of just how anxious the world is at what's going on. But as I say, it's for questions and comments. So if anyone would like to indicate however we want to indicate, I see we've got a message from Sarah who's asking, what could we do differently for Hong Kong as an independent nation in charge of our foreign policies? Well, I think that's a question for me, actually. The cornerstone of Scotland and the SNP's foreign policy, I believe, will be EU membership. And by working as a bloc within the EU, I think we'll be able to achieve more than any one member can individually. So EU, the foreign policy chief, is concerned about this, and he's made various noises about it. But I would be lobbying for sanctions. I'd be lobbying to actually ramp this up in terms of making Beijing aware that there are consequences to this. This is not a wholly internal matter. That Hong Kong obviously is part of China, but China has legal obligations under the Sino-British Treaty handing Hong Kong back to China, that it was one country, two systems. Those commitments have been comprehensively destroyed, and there needs to be consequences to it in international law. And economic leverage is the main leverage we have over China, and I would be pushing for the EU to do a lot more on that field. But I see Emma's raised a hand. Emma, do you want to chip in? The floor's yours.
Sorry, I was just asking a question. I've popped it in the chat, but I'm happy for you to continue answering that question before I move on. It wasn't a point on that specific question.
Well, I pretty much got to the end of where I was in terms of, as an independent state, we'll have a voice within the EU and worldwide to push for sanctions. We need to obviously recognise that acting as a bloc, as the EU, will achieve a lot more than we ever will as on our own, as the UK indeed is finding. The UK has very limited means of focusing Beijing's mind on this. Acting with the EU, we've got a better opportunity to do that in terms of economic consequences that count.
So my question was just going to be about the ability to organise during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I know that Stuart said that meetings have kind of moved online. I just wanted to hear if there's been a negative impact because of that, and how you've kind of tackled that and worked around it for the activists.
Francis, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, thank you, Alyn. Yeah, it's getting more difficult in terms of we can't organise protests in person. I mean, we did try to use a very short window when both England and Scotland was not in lockdown. There was a small protest happened in late September, I think. Sorry, my memory is not very good at the moment. It was mainly for the Save 12 Hong Kong Youth. So the Save Hong Kong Youth was 12 Hong Kong youth, 12 young youngsters who were they were facing charges, very, very harsh charges, including rioting, and then some of them were facing national security law related charges, and they were obviously didn't see any point of standing trial because you're not going to get a fair trial, so there's no point. So they unfortunately have decided the best way to go into freedom is to flee Hong Kong by boats. So they were on small boats, and in Hong Kongese English we call it a sampan, SAMPN, which basically is like a small speedboat with an engine at the back. It's all very, not sophisticated. And they were trying to travel on that small boat, 12 people on that small boat, to an outlying island out of Hong Kong, which is governed by Taiwan. And they were trying to flee Taiwan. Unfortunately, they were caught by the Chinese at the Chinese waters. And once they've been caught by the Chinese, they've now been gone missing more than 100 days. And they were now being kept in detention in facilities in Shenzhen, the border city of Hong Kong. The 12 youth families had heard nothing from them. So it's a horrible situation. But what really translates into it is the reason why we were against the extradition treaty arrangement with China, the reason why we are against China taking a firm control in Hong Kong, the reason why we're fighting for our autonomy, because we know that under Chinese rule, anything like that sort will happen. It's a norm. But that should not be okay, because we were promised to continue our way of life, to continue the democratic system, to continue our autonomy for the handover, and that's one of the things that we're fighting for. Sorry, going back to your questions. So COVID-19. So certainly it will make protests hard to organise, but at the same time, for example, let's say that the webinar today, if we're not in COVID time, most possibly we'll be meeting in person. I would love that. But that also means that, sometimes people can't make it because, let's say, if I can't travel to Scotland and all people, let's say other people, I think someone just locked out because she had another meeting happening right now. So technologies and COVID has changed the dynamics of organising things. But this online aspects, of course, it's not as effective as organising a march, a rally, or even protesting outside a Chinese consulate, but it can bring people together. It allows you more flexibility, and in a way, it allows me to speak to you without dressing in black blocs. So we can utilise that, and I think internet is a powerful tool, and I'm sure you all know that probably better than me. So by sharing and promoting news related to Hong Kong, it's very important, because how are you going to raise that awareness? Are people aware that by January next year that there might be a new group of Hong Kongers moving to Scotland, and how are you going to welcome these people? So there are a lot of things you can do, and I think COVID is a challenge, but it's not a challenge that we can't turn it into something that's beneficial.
Thanks, Francis. A very, very thorough answer. See a question from Michael Donaldson. Michael, the floor is yours.
Hi, I was just wondering your kind of opinion on the change in America with the administration there, whether that would have a beneficial impact, because to me it seems that they've kind of been non-existent in terms of foreign policy over the past 4 or 5 years. So I'm just kind of wondering, do you think that would have a positive impact on the kind of situation that Hong Kong's facing?
Francis?
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you, Michael. That's a very good question. In terms of what's the US, I would assume, in terms of what Biden becoming a new president, whether that was going to bring any possible changes. An interesting aspect when it comes to the US-Hong Kong relations, it's a wide sectors in Hong Kong who are pro-democracy, who are pro-human rights, who are obviously in favor of an international rule-based system. They are actually, have positive views with Donald Trump, which I know is something that's kind of odd, and so allow me to explain that very quickly. The reason that Hong Kongers, a considerable amount of Hong Kongers felt positive with Donald Trump and they actually felt the anxiety with Biden, it's because some of the Hong Kongers are seeing Donald Trump as being this eccentric person who didn't really care about norms. And when you're dealing with China, which is a massive bully, which is a bully that knows international norms and limitation of the West and limitation of playing by the rule book very well, that there is a belief within the Hong Kong people that because you're dealing with a bully like that kind of people, you need to have someone who actually doesn't play with the rule book in order to be hawkish on China. And of course, that view is not shared by all the people. However, but if you look beyond Donald Trump, both parties in the House and in Senate, there is a unanimous support in the US Congress on being more assertive, more demanding on China. Both houses passed the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, and that is a very, very important piece of legislation. So the relations between Hong Kong and the US is governed by the US Hong Kong Policy Act. That was passed in 1992, and that act effectively is the ultimate law to govern the relations between US and Hong Kong, which is treating Hong Kong as a sovereign entity, if you like. Which means that even though Hong Kong will then become part of China, the US will treat Hong Kong differently, including no tariffs, a different visa regime, there's no limitations on exporting arms and all other sensitive technologies to Hong Kong. And so there have been set of laws to govern US relations with Hong Kong. And the passing of the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, which actually drafted by the Republicans, is to fundamentally change that piece of law. And since that law passed, the US government has now declared that Hong Kong is no longer autonomous under the new provisions of the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. And with the new law, the US is also the first country to introduce sanctions against Hong Kong officials, including the disgraceful chief executive Carrie Lam and other officials. So there is a consensus happening in Capitol Hill that China is the new threat, not just a threat to the US, but a threat to our democratic way of life. China is challenging every pieces of what we believe fundamentally, human rights, democracy, rule of law. China is doing everything she can to challenge that. And there is a consensus built up in the Congress. Biden, the reason why Hong Kong was feeling a bit apprehensive of a Biden presidency in the initial beginning, because they were looking at Biden's record as vice president when Obama was president. And unfortunately, I would be honest with you, I do feel that Obama missed some of the opportunities. He was being a bit too soft with China. That was the stage that not just Obama, actually, the entire West, including Germany, including the UK, including everyone. Back in 2010, people were still thinking that, oh yeah, we know China is going to be a bit thuggish, but we should engage with China. We should talk with it. To talk with China, we should be a civilized manner because we think China was going to play by the rule book. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. That has never been the case. But it's an interesting perspective. So there is kind of a disbelief or mistrust from the Hong Kongers that the Biden, because of Democrats' record in not being hawkish enough to China, it's alarming. But I think what really it will translate to is that now that we see that the proposed cabinet members of Biden's administrations and the new Secretary of State, he's very experienced and he has a very good record when it comes to China. So I think this consensus within the Congress, which passed the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act by a big margin, almost unanimously, will continue. And I think now that the challenging question will be, what position would Biden administration want themselves to be in this China conversation? Because ultimately, Hong Kong is linked to China, and are you willing to take drastic measure? Are you willing to work with other countries, but in a way that is actually going to make a difference? Because China is giant. China is not afraid of the EU. China is not afraid of the UK. But if the UK and the EU and the US all work together, then China will raise an eyebrows and China might actually retreat a bit. But we need to wait and see. But I think now that seeing what the Biden administration, the nominations, I am confident that they will continue the policies. It is all the consensus of the Capitol Hill, so I think we'll continue to see that to happen.
Thanks, Francis. That's a fascinating perspective. The expectations of the Biden presidency, I fear, are rather higher than the reality is going to be. And I think your comments about the Obama administration are spot on from my perspective. We've got a question as well from Laura Pollock. Laura, you there?
Hello, yes, I'm here.
Hiya, floor is yours.
It was just to ask, I know data would be hard to come by, but it was just to ask how many, if you have any idea of how many prisoners have been arrested during the protests and since 2019, and also what are the chances and hope for those prisoners to attain amnesty?
Francis?
Sorry, were you talking about amnesty for people who are fleeing Hong Kong?
It was for prisoners who, as in for the recent activists who have been arrested and such.
Yeah, so we noticed there are considerable amounts of people from Hong Kong who are fleeing Hong Kong have arrived to the UK. Those who are older than 23 years old who might have a BNO passport, they will now be able to benefit from the new visa scheme, which the UK government has so generously introduced. However, my attention would be focusing on people who are aged between 18 to 23. These people, they were born after the handover. They were the most frontline people. You know, they were the most the largest group of people who engaged in the protests, and a lot of them are facing a lot of charges, and they are fleeing Hong Kong. Currently, if they are in the UK, the most obvious way for them to do is to apply asylum, and we know the asylum process is long, and even though some of them may have very good reasons to apply to them, sometimes it might be hard for them to prove that they need asylum, because you need to show evidence that you are engaged in something. And you protest in Hong Kong, you do not give evidence because that's your crime. You know, that's the evidence that people are going to charge put against you. So that might be hard. So I think what I think we all should work together is we need to address this issues of a large quantity of Hong Kong young activists who are coming to the UK seeking for asylums. So we need more flexibilities in that, and I think that's an issue that I trust that you guys can make it big in order to get pressures.
Alyn, could I just jump in there and add a few statistics to what Francis was saying? Under the new national security law, which came in at the beginning of July, there's only been a couple of dozen people charged so far. However, that bears no semblance of the total number who've been arrested and charged for taking part in the protests over the last year and a half, if you like. That number is probably running at over 10,000 arrests. So this is a massive number of particularly young Hong Kongers. And all those who were arrested for protests before the national security law came in know that they face the authorities trying to introduce charges under the national security law and effectively backdating them until before that law came in. And we also know that China, having stomped its iron heel over the judicial process in Hong Kong, anybody who is charged with offences under the pre-national security law situation still faces massively disproportionate sentences in prison and worse. And that is why so many are already deciding that they need to flee Hong Kong for things that they did before the national security law came in. They know that they're going to be targeted. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. That's very helpful. It's of course, from our perspective, we want to see China abide by its commitments in the Sino-British agreement. I'm pro-China. I think China could be a very constructive partner on a lot of stuff with us. But we believe in international law. We believe that there needs to be consequences for breaking international law. And I think there needs to be a more concerted move to highlight what is not being done properly. But we've got a question from user who's, I'll make a reference, nobody in the room other than a couple of people will get, as Cilla Black would say, who are you and where do you come from? The floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me now?
We can hear you. There you go.
Apologies, my name's Andrew and I'm from McIntyre.
Good to see you virtually.
Yeah, so I had the fortune of studying in Hong Kong for a while, and obviously from afar, I find it quite hard to watch what's going on. But I am a little bit ignorant to sort of the range of actions that we can do. So, you know, between sort of from just following certain pages on social media, so we're up to speed on what's going on and how to act, all the way through to, you know, how can we put pressure on the UK government to act? What's the sort of range of mechanisms and actions that we can take to support this? And I suppose that's a question targeted at sort of everyone here, really, from MPs to Whitehouse Consultancy and Fight for Freedom.
Francis, do you want to respond to that?
Thank you. That's a very good question. I think in general, you know, sometimes it does feel rather distant that, you know, China and Scotland, it's a long way between, and you probably won't feel the pressure of China in your doorstep, and that's a good thing. But on the other hand, you know, I think what we're seeing is China, because China's been kind of preparing to take over. You know, I know some people might disagree with that term, but it's just within our positions that, especially for Hong Kong, that we are convinced, because we know China far too well, which is sometimes makes our lives hard. But we know China is not, you know, China has no intention to follow international orders. China has no intention to follow international treaties, obligations, and China it's very cautious of sort of restoring its imperial status. And that's one thing that, when it comes to understanding China, you know, we have to understand the history. I think that there's also another question, I'll answer that later, but that's related to how the history of China made China react in a certain way, make policy people, make all these communists in Beijing react in a certain way. So I think the to answer your question, I think we should probably be more cautious when it comes to engaging with Hong Kong and China-related issues. Let's say, you know, you most likely will, if you go to Scottish University, there are Hong Kong students, engage with them, support them. If Hong Kong students are going to submit motions in the student union, support their motion, because the Chinese will mobilize the people to fight against Hong Kongers. That's been happening across the UK. We had some very horrible stories from Sheffield, you know, students being targeted, you know, both violently and both verbally, and of course in door of the union. And that's not something, you know, we don't want that to happen in Scotland. And the Scotland champion free speech, and Scotland shouldn't be an easy target for the Chinese to attack, because and that's one thing. And I think the second thing is you also be cautious in what you buy. What kind of service do you use? Do you use TikTok? I don't know how many people use TikTok, but I would advise you not to use TikTok. TikTok is a Chinese app, and by using Chinese information technologies services, you are sacrificing your own data security to China, and that's how they compromise, and that's how they get data. China is big on tech, and tech is a very powerful tool for China to control, maintain control at home and abroad. So that's these kind of small things that you can start doing by answering your question. If you're going to boycott certain practices, if you're going to boycott certain countries because they are unethical, then you ask yourself, why are you using Chinese product? I know it's hard, even I'm probably wearing clothes that are made in China. So I'm not asking you to sort of completely cut out from it. But there are sort of small things you can start doing, and there are small things you can start influencing your friends and your family. Maybe start asking this question. Like next time when you bump into Hongkongers on your doorstep, on your front street, on your high street, show him the support. When you see Hongkongers moving to the UK, moving to Scotland from January next year onward, welcome them, make them feel that they have a new home in Scotland. And I think that's something everyone can do.
I think if I might add to that, I think Francis is right, that the sum total of many small things is a mountain of things. And there are things that you can do in Scotland. You're not isolated from the world. First of all, don't wait for somebody else to move a supportive motion at your student union. Let it be seen as a Scots nationalist initiative. Put down a motion of support yourself. I'm sure that we can get messages of support for that motion, not only from your own senior politicians who are on this call, but from Hong Kongers and organisations around the world. The second thing is you have local media. Local media are starved of stories. Again, why not organise a letter signed by 3, 4, 5, 6 local people, possibly from your branch? It's an opportunity to plug the SNP and its leadership on this issue. Write to the local newspaper. Offer to do an interview with your local radio station. My experience of working for 40 years with members of the House of Commons is that their local news are starved of local stories. So local group taking initiative on something is always worth a plug in the local newspaper. Present a petition. It doesn't have to have a huge number of names on it. You get 100 names and present it to your local MP. That's a photograph for the local newspaper. That's an interview on the local radio. What we have to do here, of course, you see, is not just to take with us those like you who are taking an active interest in this issue, but those for whom they don't see why it's relevant to them. And I think this is particularly important given the generosity, and I give this to whoever is in government at the moment, the generosity and breadth of that offer to say, we will allow to come to this country up to 3 million Hong Kongers. And this is a government that was just voted in on an anti-immigration platform, honouring its historical, political and moral commitment to an entire city. So offer to present a petition to your local MP, whatever party, welcoming this policy. Forget that it's the Tory one, it's backed by every party in the House of Commons. Just welcome it so that the people in your area see that this is something people are not rid of. These people who might come here from Hong Kong, particularly the young ones, they're well educated, well trained, highly motivated, entrepreneurial, and in some cases have access to investment funds from families who have also been business people. They'd be a great asset to any town. They'll bring children to go into the local schools. They'll pay local council taxes or rates. This is a huge opportunity. Various economic think tanks have estimated that this could add billions to the UK economy. Forget all the talk about being dependent on social welfare. They're not allowed to be dependent on social welfare. The fiscal think tanks have calculated that the additional tax they will pay on their economic activity will bring billions to the UK economy. And of course, other matters being equal, you want as many of those in Scotland after independence as you can possibly have. Sorry.
No, a great contribution, and we certainly do, absolutely. We've got a question from Joseph Brannigan as well now.
Oh, hello, can you hear me?
Yep, got you fine.
Just a quick question. I was wondering how much the Century of Humiliation, the 1839 to 1949, has impacted China's moves in Hong Kong.
Thanks, Joseph. Francis?
Yeah, thank you, Alyn. Massively. The Central Humiliation, it's you can certainly, to a certain extent, treat that as the doctrine of Chinese nationalism. China is a combination of Marxist-Leninism and Chinese nationalism. The Chinese Communist Party governed China with two guiding principles. The first one is it is still a Marxist-Leninist country, so they are functioning in the Leninism. But you can argue the Leninism is gone, so the Marxism is gone, so Leninism, so it's order and control, and that is China. That's the ultimate form of governance in China. And the other thing to legitimize the communist rule, to legitimize anything that China is doing, including the crushing Hong Kong, including the concentration camp in Xinjiang targeting the Uyghurs, is this Chinese nationalism. And what Chinese nationalism is it's a weird form of extreme nationalism that it's based on this whole idea of central humiliation. So what China perceived is China is the victim of colonialism, of imperialism from the West. And hence that China, this great country, great nation with glorious history, being humiliated by Western powers in the late 19th century until 1949. And then when the communist China was established, that Mao Zedong very famously, he spoke on the Tiananmen Square on the establishment of the Chinese state, saying that from this onward the Chinese people will stand up. So then the communist is the liberator, and liberating the Chinese from the shackles of imperialism and from the aggression from the West. Now, China was a target from imperialism. That is a fact. China was being invaded in certain area, but at the same time, a lot of people seem to forget that China itself is also an empire. And long before China's aggression against other countries, China's were engaged in aggression to Korea, to Xinjiang, to Tibet. These are not Han-speaking region. Why are they part of China? Colonialism. Chinese rule in Xinjiang is colonialism. Chinese rule in Hong Kong right now is neo-colonialism. But what China didn't seem that way. China thought that, I'm always the victim, so now that I'm overcompensating, I want to take over the world because I want to take my rightful place in the world, be this glorious empire with glorious history. And that's a really twisted and wrong way to interpret your history and your glorious past, because Chinese civilization is fantastic. Chinese language, everything, the food and everything, it reflects on the deep philosophical understanding of the Chinese culture that me, even as a Hong Konger, I'm proud of that side of me. But but the Chinese way of thinking, it's so wrong. That is indeed, you are correct. That is actually sort of, Chinese foreign policies is completely based on that. That's why China is so eager to do this Belt and Road initiative. China is very eager to get Hong Kong back, and of course Taiwan, because China wants to cement the idea of this great revitalization, the great revival of Chinese states is the legitimate reason why the Communist Party is doing its governing China. So yes, so to answer your question, yes, it is why China conduct in its way. It is why China, it becomes sort of like a bully, because China completely forgot that you can expand, you can do great things, but you do have to follow rules. And I think for us in Hong Kong, we feel very we feel the first-hand impacts of that. Yeah, thank you.
Fascinating. Thanks, Francis, and thanks, Joseph. Question as well now from Niamh Dorian. Niamh, floor's yours.
Hello. So something that I'm quite interested in, which I think pertains to this, is the kind of debate between national security and human security. And of course, traditionally, kind of national security is seen as something really important, the security of the nation. But over the past couple of decades, human security has become really important. And I think in Hong Kong, the kind of threat to their identity can be seen as a big security issue. It can be framed as an existential threat, which is kind of from securitization theory thinking. I'm an international relations student. So is this kind of emphasis on human security and turning it, really focusing on the kind of humanitarian issues, a kind of preferable strategy going forward in terms of dealing with the situation? Also, within Hong Kong as local Hong Kongers, but from a kind of global national point of view, how we kind of tackle and combat what's going on as well. if that makes sense.
Good question, Neve. Thank you. Francis, do you want to respond to that?
Thank you. Yes, that's a very good question. I think yes, I think in terms of I think we are seeing a lot of states using national security in a way to sort of national security in a way to legitimize a lot of state action. I think unfortunately we're seeing that not just in China, we're also seeing that in other democratic states. So I think this is a potential area that we need to talk about on this. But I think I'm not sure if I'm understanding your human security sort of correctly, but I will just attempt to answer your question as best as I can. I think at the end of the day, it's about a balance, because we know that we have our criticism on let's say France is trying to tighten its control because of really threats. But of course, you have to be very careful to draw the line. But I think even with all the controversial topics we see in the West, we know that there is a check and balance in place. We know that despite that, sometimes laws might not necessarily be popular, but they are there for reasons. And there is a mechanisms that you can say no to that law. And there's mechanisms you can monitor the governments. What we see differently in secure, authoritarian states like China. China's using national security as a reasons to say that Hong Kong's been unrest for a year. People burning shops and throwing grenades or anything. Making a huge mess. And this is a security issue, so that's why we need to do something on it. But the difference is you have to look into: is that really threats to the national security, as in undermining the livelihood of people and undermining the existence of a state, or was it really just being used to target activists? And I think that we're seeing that China is the latter.
Thanks, Francis. Fascinating. A question from Jack Ip, if you'd like to take the floor, please.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Chuck. So I'm part of a group in Scotland who have been organizing protests and things about Hong Kong since about last year. So we have received tremendous support from the public, which we are very grateful for. But at the same time, we also saw a lot of people with commenting to us that even though there are human rights problems in Hong Kong, it's not really that severe compared to other regions amongst the world. And also they feel that Scotland is quite dependent on China economically and perhaps in other ways as well. So we are just wondering, to my knowledge, there isn't any kind of official survey or anything on how the public view about China. And so I'm just wondering if you guys would have any kind of feeling on how the public generally view about China and whether there is a threat or an opportunity. And second of all, in terms of the economic reliance and kind of relationship between Scotland and China, how we could convince the public or present to them a case that we need to stand up to China despite all these ties. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thanks for your activism as well. That's very courageous, and glad you're doing it. Perhaps that's one for me. I mean, look, I'm not anti-China in any sense. The SNP is not anti-China. We're pro-international law. We're pro-trade. China is an important economic partner for us, for the UK, for the entire world. China is an important economic operator. But we also need to look at countries in the reality, and that's where human rights are global and universal, and where human rights are infringed, we should be vocal on that, and there should be consequences to that. And what we see China doing with Hong Kong has recently, and it's been a change of policy. I mean, even 10 years ago, we weren't where we were. What China's been doing with the Uyghur population as well, with camps in the east and Xinjiang, we've seen really very serious human rights abuses. And I don't think we can have an economic partnership that isn't based on honesty and transparency. And that's where I'm pro multilateral sanctions. but it's up to all of us to be vocal within these standards. I don't think we should turn a blind eye to this because it's China. I think the general view within Scotland in terms of the general public is evolving. And I think we've seen this 10 years ago, Chinese investment in a Scottish university was uniformly welcomed because we're a globalized economy, we're a globalized world. We want to see engagement and interaction. But as we've seen more negative reality coming to light from within China, and the Belt and Road Initiative, I've been in Africa and I've seen the infrastructure, and it's big and it's on a scale that hasn't been seen since colonialism. And there's a project there that's being rolled out, and it's being rolled out very deliberately. And of course, China has a long memory, but we have values, and we need to be vocal in the defense of our values. And I would hope if we're vocal in defense of our values and we work with other countries in the EU, the UN, other countries that are like-minded, then we can see more consequences to the infringement of human rights, because I don't think we can just say this is a domestic matter, let's be quiet and focus on trade. I think the people of Scotland expect more from us.
I think, Alyn, you've got a very good point there. That I think one of the additional points I would make, though, is one of our objectives working with Stand With Hong Kong and the protesters on the ground is to make sure that as world attention becomes more cognizant of China's wider human rights abuses, becomes more cognizant of its breaches of international law and some of the egregious crimes that it is committing, that attention on China as a whole does not overlook the particular tragedy of Hong Kong, for which Britain is uniquely involved because of our historical links, both in colonizing in the first place and then in terms of the handover agreements, and then whether intentionally or otherwise allowing the Chinese Communist Party to feel that it could get away with what it is now doing in Hong Kong. So our job is to keep Hong Kong on the agenda in that great global debate. And in that context, because you asked originally about percentage support, one of the things that I found beyond surprising, I was actually shocked. On the day that Dominic Raab in the afternoon got up and made a statement in the House of Commons about the new BNO passport scheme, he made his statement and he sat down, and I was still scratching my head at the end of a ministerial statement as to whether he meant that up to 300,000 Hong Kongers could come, being BNO passport holders, or whether he was hinting at a bigger figure.
Yep.
And then that night, at 1 minute past midnight, Boris Johnson went live with his whole page article in the Daily Telegraph saying, oh no, we're adding a zero. It's 3 million that we meant. Now, I was shocked at that. I was proud at that moment of being British. But then over the next couple of weeks, there's a website that you guys probably don't read every day like I do, Conservative Home. And the reason I cite is because they did a poll and they found that 85% of Conservative Party activists, i.e. the readers of their website, completely supported that policy. Now, this is a party that, just as I say, fought a general election campaign on an anti-immigration policy. But they perceived that this was a stain on their party's conscience, that almost uniquely, in terms of handing over our former colonies, the people of Hong Kong were given no say in the matter. Nigeria had a referendum. Loads of places had referendums about what they wanted their future to be. Hong Kong was given no choice. And I think that is something that Scots can point out. The other thing that you can do in terms of the China challenge, if you like, is to out-innovate them. Silicon Glen, the digital exports of the United Kingdom are still one of our most successful exports. Without any doubt about that. Food is one of our biggest, believe it or not. And then digital gaming programs, things like that are developed here in Great Britain are still one of our biggest exports. And we should encourage the British government nationally and the Scottish government back home in Edinburgh to invest in that, because that's where the future challenges are. Somebody was talking earlier, he who owns the digital apps controls your data. And that's where the future battles are going to be fought.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. I very much agree with the delete TikTok stuff, because I had a briefing from some IT people and understood about 1 word in 3, but I certainly got the point that there's all sorts of nasties in some of these apps that we need to be really, really careful about. But we have a question from Dante Lopez, please. And forgive me, that'll need to be the final question because I'm conscious of time. But Dante, the floor is yours.
So I was wondering if there was, independent Scotland was to take action against China, such as economic sanctions or to come out in support of people of Hong Kong, if there could be a potential fallout from that on the worldwide political scene, and if so, how can we control that and mitigate the impact of that and ensure that Scotland is still seen on the world stage as a strong player?
I think that's one for me. I mean, I'm game for an independent Scotland issuing economic sanctions, but I think it's more effective if we work within the EU and the UN, and there's a coalition, especially if we're looking at China. But it's about being vocal in defence of our values, and then working in concert with our friends and our allies to make the case that there needs to be consequences, because China's not the only country in the world that isn't doing what it should do on human rights. And Chris's point about the situation in Hong Kong being a unique connection for the UK and Scotland is absolutely correct. This is a clear legal breach that has happened. So there must be consequences. If there's not consequences, then international law is undermined in a terrible way. And sometimes there's realpolitik, but we weren't silent when Russia illegally occupied Crimea. There was EU sanctions very fast. The fact that we're seeing a breach of the Sino-British agreement and the fact that we're seeing such human rights abuses by China, I think, must have international action. I don't think Scotland should be shy of contemplating such action independently, but I think it would be more effective within a coalition. And the economic consequences, obviously, we need to look at what, in the round, the consequences of that would be. Trade disputes happen all the time. There's a trade dispute right now with China over the manufacture of solar panels, and that there was anti-dumping coming into the EU market of solar products. So these things do happen, and I think we need to, in the pursuit of an ethical foreign policy, I think broadly we'd be allied with the UK, with the EU, and actually my issue would be pushing it to go a bit further and actually have some consequences. Also, the Magnitsky sanctions, which are targeted on individuals who are making decisions. There's much less economic impact to that sort of stuff, but it is a way to make a point and exert pressure in a very, very specific way.
Indeed, on the Magnitsky sanctions, Chinese PR is slightly weird because it's all aimed at suppressing the people in China. So the messages it conveys overseas are often not what it would really want. But this week, Carrie Lam, the chief executive of Hong Kong, did an interview in which she observed that due to the banking sanctions imposed in the United States, she no longer has a bank account. So she has piles of cash around her home in Hong Kong. And at about £500,000 a year, she's one of the highest paid leaders in the world. So what she was effectively announcing to the world was not how terrible it is for her, poor little lady in Hong Kong, but that A, sanctions work because she is now being personally inconvenienced, and B, to every burglar in Hong Kong, I've got piles of cash around my house. And C, I'm reminding you how much I get paid every month because it must go up for driving a wheelbarrow, is all I can say. So Chinese PR has unintended consequences. And to go back to the international alliances thing, one of the unintended consequences its belligerence has caused has been to create, almost out of thin air, a new international collaboration. Yes, the whole of the world is now aware of the China issues, even those who are in denial about it. China at the United Nations, they're more aware of it now. But the Five Eyes alliance used to be only about intelligence sharing. That's the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the main Anglophone world, if you like, bound historically by cultural ties and divided by a common language spoken differently. But what was initially only an intelligence sharing organization, by the belligerence of China, has turned into a political cooperation vehicle, whereby for the first time we're now seeing the Five Eyes nations issuing joint statements against China's egregious clampdown in Hong Kong. They created that political reality almost out of thin air because we had to band together. And I think that's one of the things. Totalitarian states make mistakes in their international relations. So we can take hope. Just because they're mighty doesn't mean they're impregnable or infallible.
That's wise words, and thank you for it. That's fascinating. Well, I would thank everybody for tonight's participation and enthusiastic questions. I propose to hand over to Francis for some concluding remarks, and then back to Valentina to close for the Young Scots for Independence. But I'm really glad that the YSI and Whitehouse Consultancy were able to set this up with Fight for Freedom, Stand with Hong Kong, because we are an internationalist party. We do believe in the rule of law. We're interested and we're engaged. So it's been a great pleasure to be part of it, and great pleasure to introduce Francis again with some concluding remarks. Francis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So yeah, thank you so much for all the questions. They're all very good. I am, on behalf of Stand with Hong Kong, I am incredibly grateful to this webinar. You know, we are seeing a very high turnout, and hopefully that we will continue engaging with you guys. I'm only sorry that I cannot meet you guys in person. I would very much like to do that. The quicker Hong Kong is to become a free society, the quicker I can could do that. But just before I go, I mean, I hope that, you know, this will give you something food for thought after tonight. But also, just one thing I want to say before I go, before we finish. You know, cherish your freedom. Don't take it for granted. The fact that you are able to exercise your freedom, your democracy, your right to determinations in the UK, despite the fact that you're raising constitutional questions, but you have every right and every freedom to do that. But people in Hong Kong don't have that, and that is a stark contrast to how important and how lucky that we are. We live in a democratic society, and never take that for granted.
Yep.
Hear, Francis. Thanks so much, and I do express my solidarity with you, and salute your bravery. It's been heartbreaking to see what's happening in Hong Kong, and hopefully our solidarity can go somewhere, and hopefully making things better. But pass over to the YSI for concluding remarks. Valentina, are you still here, or Kaylin?
Yes, hi. Well, thank you so much all for coming. Thank you to Stuart and to Alyn and to Francis for the important point of views and their voices. Francis, special thank you to you for doing this with us and for standing up and not being afraid. And even though it's not easy, you're still fighting forward, and that's something we should all be thanking you for. As young people, I think it's our duty to stand up with the people of Hong Kong. It's our duty to democracy, it's our duty to our rights, and it's our duty to expression. So hopefully everything that we've learned today, we can take it on board and move forward and try to do as much as we can from Scotland, because as Francis has said, we are truly privileged to be able to protest and to manifest and to disagree with our government when we want, and not being able to to be scared to face those repercussions and to be able to not be afraid of our freedom of expression. So thank you again so much all for coming, and hope we all stand in solidarity with Hong Kong, and hopefully we can all make an important change.
Well, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.